Hello, everyone, and welcome to the President's Podcast with Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, a feature of our brand new online newsroom called On the Record with the Ohio Senate, the views the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney. I'm the Director of Communication for the Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus here in the Ohio Senate. Well, welcome. What do you think about the President's Podcast in our brand new online newsroom?
Well, this is pretty neat. I think it's a great opportunity for the Ohio Senate and a variety of our senators here, I think, are going to be participating to really talk about some of the things that do not get a lot of coverage that we think should. It's public policy. As I always say, the things that are most important often aren't the most exciting, and the public may not hear about them until it affects them. So I think it's important for us to talk about these things.
One of the things, I spent 25 years in broadcast news. So I was an anchor, I was a political talk show host. Most of my time I spent covering the Ohio State House for the Ohio News Network and the CBS affiliate in Columbus. And what has changed on both the broadcast and print side are many things, but one of the big things I've noticed is now it seems like I'm reading and watching a narrative rather than the news.
Yeah, I think there has always been bias in reporting. I mean, you can think about the things that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams said about each other, usually anonymously in newspapers, and in the 30s and 40s and 50s, there were multiple newspapers, and each side had their newspaper. But those were the editorial parts, but then there was plenty of reporting. The thing I think that has changed is, for better or worse, I think for worse, there aren't as many reporters because traditional media can't afford to do that. The revenue streams are down, because people are getting their information through social media and other places. So the folks who are writing about facts, there's not as many of them. Now, it's easy to write about opinion and editorial and have that leak into news stories, frankly, because you don't have to check the facts. You can sort of decide, well, here's what I want the story to be about. I'm going to go find a couple of quotes that fit it, and if I don't find quotes that fit it, I'm going to write the same story anyway. So it's sort of the demise of the old-time reporter is what we're seeing right now, and I kind of see traditional media has burst into 1,000 pieces, and so we see individuals, people having their own podcasts, for example, come out, and you can find facts. Public has to go look for it.
Well, opinion really is starting to blur the facts. Even on social media, I will see reporters post something about a story, and it's sprinkled with a little bit of their opinion or whatever the narrative is that they've been assigned to take. And not just an angle, but a narrative. And I've also seen a lot of name calling where there used to be a difference, a true delineation between the editorial side of a newspaper and the newsroom. And now we see the editorial sides not just disagreeing, for example, with Senate President Matt Huffman or State House Republicans. It comes right down to name calling. And what I really feel is unprofessional, if not libelous, and really borders on slander as well when it comes to spoken word and podcast. The most sinister politician in 20 years. Last week, they called you a megalomaniac from the Cleveland Plain Dealer's editorial page. Heartless assassin, you've been called. I mean, to me, that steps across the line. Your reaction is what?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sort of chuckling. You practice law for 40 years. I grew up with 8 brothers and sisters, and you develop a pretty thick skin. Someone mentioned these to me, and I said, well, I'm really only one of those. I'll let you guess which one I am. But I think the point is that when you try harder and harder to get the public's attention, and the way you try harder is to be more outrageous, what happens then is you just begin to lose credibility. When I know they wrote a series of things like that, Cleveland Plain Dealer, about me over.
Do you even read the Plain Dealer?
Only when someone says you should read this.
Unfortunately, I have to. But.
Yeah, well, there you go. But yeah, I subscribe. Cheryl and I subscribe to a couple of newspapers, our hometown paper and the Wall Street Journal, and I like reading the print because I'm 63. That's what guys my age do. Fortunately.
Talking with Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman on the President's Podcast. Make sure you subscribe, upper left-hand corner of On the Record on our website, and the President's Podcast, upper right-hand corner that you can subscribe and download. Senate Bill 83, reforming higher education, really bringing a true freedom of thought again to college campuses, but it's really more than that. We've passed it in the Senate, it's in the House, and your thoughts.
Yeah, we do a lot of sort of one-off bills to fix a particular problem, and those are all important because things are always changing. But there are usually a half a dozen or so pieces of legislation in any General Assembly which address long-term problems. And higher education and how it's funded is a problem that has developed over the last 40 or 50 years. When I was in college, I could work summers and pay for about half of my tuition, and my parents paid the other half. When the federal government began guaranteeing student loans, as a result, of course, people started loaning a lot more money, including to people who couldn't pay it back. What happens when you have more money for a service or product? The cost of the service or product goes up. And that's what higher education folks have done. It really went into overdrive in 2008 when the federal government began loaning money. You didn't even have to go through a bank to do it anymore. So in the last 15 years, the cost has gone up exponentially. You can compare it to the Consumer Price Index. Medical and higher education and textbooks, believe it or not, college textbooks have gone up so much higher. And so the question is, well, why is the cost higher? Well, one of the things there are people who have been working sometimes for decades in higher education in their particular area of expertise who don't have any students, or they maybe only have one or two, but yet because of tenure and union guarantees in the contract, they can't be retrenched or put in a different position or let go. Senate Bill 83 simply allows college boards of trustees and presidents to do those kinds of things. So, if you were a lawyer and you spent 20 years checking titles, well, there are no lawyers who check titles anymore. They have people who go in and do that, and all the lawyers who ever did that are out of work. Well, nobody's crying the blues for lawyers and all the work they've lost, right? And any other job, if whether that you've been put out of business, and so we have this constant flow of cash for services that really are no longer allowed. We've got presidents and boards of trustees who are either negligent or afraid, or in most cases can't do anything about it. Senate Bill 83 is going to give the chance to reform it and allow the discussion for the first time in the state of Ohio. We're going to talk about how to control costs in higher education, as they do in some other places. They're beginning to do, and we have to do it not only because of the terrible student loan burden, but because now with fewer children being born, because it's so expensive, fewer people choosing to go to college, the population is going to go down. So it's really kind of desperation time.
Can't afford a house payment because I have to make my student loan payment, which is almost and oftentimes more than a house payment.
Sure. Well, I can't afford to get married. I can't afford to buy a house. We can't afford to have children. We can't afford to buy a car. There are a lot of people who might go into private practice as a lawyer, but they need a guaranteed paycheck to pay for their student loan. Well, as a result of that, there are fewer general practice, so there are fewer lawyers to provide that service to the public.
Speaking of rising costs, there has been a tremendous amount of uproar and complaints and criticism about the valuation, the property valuation, going up 40+%, and how that all came about seems to be something that you're concerned about. Members of the General Assembly, Senator Lang, I know, certainly is concerned about it. What's your message to taxpayers about this increased valuation?
Well, we have this concept here, and the concept of taxing people based on values, it's certainly not new in the United States. They used to value property in England at one point based on how many fireplaces you had, because more fireplaces you have, the richer you were. And so around tax time, people would brick up their fireplaces and to try to lower their tax bill, or they'd brick up the window where the tax collector could see it. So taxing based on how rich we think somebody is and trying not to avoid paying the tax, that's gone on ever since there were taxes. Well, we have decided that this valuation of property is the way to do it. Well, that's fine, except it doesn't always follow the actual market price. It's a variety of other factors. And, you know, everybody who's ever had a valuation where their taxes went up said, oh, well, can you find somebody who'll pay me that for my house? Because I'll take it right now. And so it's not always connected to reality. Part of this problem was created by unelected folks imposing a new way of valuing on local county auditors. And we're not supposed to increase taxes without a vote of the people. That's why we have school levies. And so the valuation is sort of this, higher valuations is sort of a back door method of people paying more taxes.
And writing a law without the legislature doing it.
Well, that's part of it, and also directing the tax collector to value things in a particular way, or the auditor in this case. So we really need to sort of take this giant machine that's called property valuation and property taxes, take the whole thing apart, because there have been little pieces and parts added on, and see how it is that we got to where we want. I think people understand that they're going to pay tax based on the value of their home, but it raises 40% in 1 year. Well, what market caused that to happen? It didn't raise 40% in the last 3 years. And, you know, typically valuations aren't going to go down 40% in that period of time either. So there needs to be more stability. The public needs to understand more also.
Final thought about the ever-changing media, especially on the editorial side. I've seen multiple submissions from our members being rejected by editorial boards. Yeah. For one reason or another, that I know that is not the case for our Democratic colleagues. And to me, it just says that we're not interested in anything other than the narrative that we want people to read. And I don't think that we should have to delete sentences, remove thoughts. We should not be policed by the First Amendment powers of an editorial board. It just seems like, well, we believe in the First Amendment, but only if you agree with the things that we are saying. You shouldn't be able to disagree. Otherwise, we're going to label you as one way or the other.
Yeah, well, the first thing you say, of course, is, well, this is a private publication. These folks can do whatever they want. But if they want to be the paper of record, if they want to be able to be the place where people go to get facts and hear both sides of the story, they really need to do that. And I know a lot of these newspapers get upset where they say, well, hey, the Senate president returned phone calls to those 3 reporters, but didn't return my phone call. Well, if you're not going to talk about both sides of the story, it's not a publication worth talking to. And we, of course, do end up giving those folks access. I can't spend, 8 hours a day talking to the media, although sometimes it seems like I do. But part of why people who still do read newspapers, like me, who go to newspapers, do that is because these folks are going to criticize both sides equally. I think the Wall Street Journal is a great paper. They are criticizing Donald Trump and Joe Biden equally, it seems like, every week, and both sides of the spectrum. So I think if they want to be credible, if they want people to pay attention, if they want to stay financially relevant, then you really need to. And I would say also, even if you don't like what Senator whoever says, they're a member of the General Assembly. The public would like to know what members of the General Assembly think about a particular item. So I think it's important for them to do that.
Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, the first edition of the President's Podcast. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Remember, check out our brand new online newsroom, On the Record, The Views the News Excludes, featuring our very first column that was rejected by a major Ohio newspaper, by one of our senators, and Senator Teresa Gavarone. You'll be able to read her column right on the front page of On the Record. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.